Hello, lovely podcast people. Welcome to another episode of me talking and you listening. Really hope you're well. This episode is about sugar, and this episode is sponsored by, Tom Thorpe. Hello, Tom. Tom is my first ever listener suggestion podcast person. Good title. I'll get it on a plaque for you, Tom. I won't. He used the form on my website, martin-mcdonald.com/NANP, not another nutrition podcast, to write a very good suggestion, and he put questions. He wrote me loads of questions to answer, and I then took those and combined them with a few other dotted questions that were on this suggestions form, and it's made for something that I think will be useful. So thank you, Tom. Sugar is obviously, and you know what, we're on about episode 20-ish now, and I had a little waning of motivation, not motivation with regards to the podcast, but actually it was probably not a waning, it was a stress, because I've just been doing it in such a lackadaisical way. Good word, you're welcome. Alexa, what does lackadaisical mean?
The adjective lackadaisical is usually defined as without interest, vigor, or determination, listless, lethargic. For more, ask me to give you
Alexa,
definitions for
stop. You're welcome, listeners. Lackadaisical. She said lackadaisical, but no, it's not. That's not how we're saying it. Anyway, and it was just because I put too much pressure on myself. Like, Chuck, I thought I'm going to need to start sticking in some references, this, that, and the other. That's not what this podcast is for. But actually, some of the questions that Tom has posed, they may be a bit too, they're a bit, not, this isn't an insult on you, Tom, boring. They're just like, what are the different types of sugar? That's mean. I'm sorry, Tom. But I just mean, like, it's like, what are the different types of sugar and how are they different? And it's a good question. And I'm actually super genuinely thankful, Tom, for doing that. I shouldn't joke too much. But you know what I mean? It's like, there's how is it broken down? They're quite academic, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And it's a good chance for me to talk about the MN School of Nutrition, our layperson's course that's coming out, which has this foundation course, the kind of foundation module, the foundation course, which is, like 50 plus lectures just in the foundation course, which will cover all of the foundational knowledge and including information like this. I think there is in fact a whole section on sugar, which will have some of this information that I will cover, but a bit more in depth and with diagrams and with the specifics. And again, not going too in depth, because the point of the course is just to give people all of the knowledge they need to then go on, especially in the foundation course, to go on to then need specific bolt-on, whether their goal is health or muscle gain or fat loss or sport and exercise. So we're only trying to give enough so that they can really understand all of those things and also not be misled by other stuff. One of the key things that I've always used as part of my teaching is teach people enough so that then they're not misled, and teach people enough so that they can then go and continue learning. Give them the tools to go and learn more, a little bit like the teach a man to fish rather than giving him a fish analogy. But sometimes just telling people what is definitely wrong so that they just don't even go down that road. And so there's some stuff on that in the sugar stuff within the MN School of Nutrition. Anyway, so yeah, if people are wanting to go that bit further and understand more, and Tom, for you, that's where it's going to be good. That's when you're going to get this all-encompassed learning on and references and whatever. So it's helped me realign myself into what this podcast is about. And actually, I will probably talk about some references, but I'm just not going, especially when they're just easy for me off the top of my head, or things that I have discussed recently or whatever. But for now, let's move on. So sugar. Now sugar does get this bad rap, and I did for those of you watching in the future, soon they'll be on YouTube when this is released, this podcast, which will probably be the end of February 2021. We still don't have them anywhere for you to view, but they will be going onto YouTube soon. We've got a thumbnail sorted, we've got the account sorted, it's happening. You'll be able to see my luscious lips and my luscious locks very soon. Right. What am I talking about? Yeah, in front of me I've got all of Tom's questions, and I'm going to use them for reference point, and I will come on at some point, Tom, to talk about what my favourite Ben & Jerry's ice cream is, because that's cool actually, a little kicker. Lots of the big podcasters have their little quirky question at the beginning or the end. So sugar. Now, recently I was actually talking about saturated fat. And I guess when people talk about fat in general, it can be super, super easy to demonize certain foods accidentally. When, there was this saturated fat tax, there are certain very healthful foods. And even a fat tax, there would be healthful foods that would be caught up in that. And again, when we talk about sugar, there's a similar scenario of just this blanket statement of, is sugar really that bad for you, is one of Tom's questions. And the answer is no, it's not. It really, really isn't. If we start from the concept of, lots of zealots these days are using paleo or evolutionary paradigms to make their cases, which I'm not completely adverse to. If people are happy with the concept of evolution, I know some people aren't, but we'll leave that for another day, or /never. But if we are happy, this is bad, isn't it? But talking about creationists, I don't know if that's the word, but you've also just got this situation. This is a terrible, terrible road to go down, Martin. Shut your mouth. But essentially, man being created and given precedence over the animals to eat them, and therefore potentially being well suited and adapted to eat them and not become unhealthy because you ate them. Same thing with evolutionary theory of, we have evolved eating them, and so probably it's okay to eat them. That's taking the ethical and moral thing of us being higher beings and being able to choose not to eat them. Oh my goodness, why do I do this? So let's carry on. Sugar and these paleo paradigms, these evolutionary paradigms, whatever, is a massive component of breast milk, just as is fat in breast milk. Protein's actually quite low in breast milk, which is quite funny. Lots of people are like, oh yeah, get the gains from the breast milk from protein. It's like, yeah, you're probably not. Anyway. So sugar is categorically not cause and effect bad for us. Here's a little tidbit or tidbit. I know which I like the sound of more. The only really cause and effect bad food stuff, I've said before, there's no bad foods, there are only bad diets. There's no bad foods, there aren't even bad meals, there are only bad diets. But when we talk about man-made trans fats, we know that they are really, really categorically not something we want to be eating. And of course, we can put up with a small amount of them with fairly negligible negative effects, but they're just not something we would ever want any of, and there's no particular reason to eat them. So anyway, sugar is not cause and effect bad for you. Now, as with many things, the dose, the poison is in the dose. But likewise, sugar is a little bit like fat, in that sugar is not just a single thing. And I think one of Tom's other questions was, how much sugar per day is the recommended amount? Now, the other thing is, Tom, I'm so uber world famous that the recommended amount differs by different country. So I would have to go through all of the many, many, many countries that I have. Anyway, I'll stop with that joke. But it differs by different country. And also, the key thing here that I want to say with this is I'm not a big fan, really, of like public health recommendations are public health recommendations. But as soon as someone takes that step to follow someone like me on Instagram or listen to me on a podcast, you are leveling up to a level that is far beyond public health guidelines. And you can start to gain some understanding that makes you able to put certain guidelines more into context. So again, when you start doing lots and lots of exercise, the game changes on a lot of public health messages, for instance. One of those being sugar, one of those perhaps being salt, for instance. Things change. And so this recommended amount, the key thing I want to say here is when we talk about sugars, often I feel like a lot more needs to be done to discuss added sugars, because there's this big issue when people start demonizing sugar, you start to get people demonizing fruit, which is a really slippery slope to negative health consequences of dietary dogma. So yes, adding, and then there's this discussion, well, does your body know the difference between sugar from honey versus table sugar, etc., etc.? And this other, what's the different types of sugar? And we have our monosaccharides, single sugars, like your glucose and your fructose being the kind of poster sugar for fruit. But fruit also contains glucose. And we have other sugars, disaccharides, two sugars, galactose. Lactose is the other one, your milk sugar. And yogurt being a food stuff that is of particular interest and maybe has some health benefits, and there's all these discussions about probiotic foods and how fermented foods and fermented yogurts might have some positive benefits to health. Anyway, so we go down a slippery slope when we start talking about sugar being bad for people, etc., etc. And so no, sugar is not cause and effect bad for you. You can consume a relatively again, large, what's it relative to? So I won't really say that, but I was going to start discussing weight loss, but I won't do that just yet. So with regards to health, if you're consuming a lot of sugar from fruit, it's probably not going to cause you major dietary issues. If that fruit is then satiating you, and you are, in the context of people who eat lots of fruit and lots of their carbohydrate comes from fruit, they don't particularly like rice or potatoes or whatever, and they're eating a lot of their carbohydrate and energy from fruit, and they, and then have other dietary variety that's making their diet balanced and meeting micronutrients, macronutrient needs, etc. So it's a tricky one. And sometimes there is just a bit of an issue of people just overcomplicating things. Is 3 bananas too many to be having in a day? And that's where this thing, if it fits your macros, really came from. Like, if it fits your macros, no. But if you're having 3 bananas and you're already eating thousands of calories of fruit and thousands of calories from all other things, and those 3 bananas are pushing you into a calorie excess, and that's maybe not ideal and whatever. But it's like, but where does the excess come from? Is the excess coming from bananas, or is it coming from other areas? Because you're not going to OD on potassium from bananas by having 3 a day or 4 a day or whatever. So it's a tiring discussion, and people almost get themselves too worked up about it, trying to be over specific on where the exact line lies with what's too much or not enough, etc., etc. Those things don't really exist. So I'm sure I pressed record. I was just going to go around and double check I had. Do you know what? I'm just going to have to. Sorry. Give me 1 little minute. Yes, I did. And we're on 17 minutes. Whoops. I've barely got anywhere with this podcast. So, but I think we've covered some good basic groundwork. I'm going back to here where Tom has asked about, should I avoid products with reduced fat because they add sugar instead? That was the thing that was inside my head when I was saying about stuff of these added sugars. This is where maybe we need to turn some of our attention to, in terms of not with overly critical or over analysis of that, but just understanding that yes, some food products. So and this is a shame, and this is where I sort of lose a lot of respect for registered nutritionists and working in food industry. And we're going to do this action on sugar, and we're going to make food companies reduce the sugar content of XYZ. And then you get, various different things coming out. And one particular instance where myself and the team attended some talks, and food industry talk, and they were like, yeah, we've reduced the sugar by 5% in this cereal. And they've just flashed it. And I think it was actually Amy, one of my staff, was like, did you see the nutritional thing? I think I was on my phone at the time because I was bored. And she said, all they've done, they've reduced the sugar, by a small percent, but they've increased the fat content of the cereal, and overall the calories have gone up. So it's just what, I use this term often, this health halo. Straight away, this many percent less sugar, therefore it's healthy. And is it? They've just added more processed ingredients, and calories actually overall have gone up. And looking at that food in and of itself of one thing, it's not necessarily a bad food, but it's just silliness. And it's just ticking boxes, and it's food industry just, sticking to the latest fad guideline by silly health ministers and silly nutrition professionals who just don't get critical thinking and don't get the bigger picture. So Should I avoid products with reduced fat because they add sugar instead? Well, no, they don't always. Like Dr. Asi Malhotra, a very moronic doctor in the UK, for any of my followers further afield, a little bit like a rubbish version. You know, if you're going to be a baddie, right? You want to be a good baddie. You want to be you don't want to be like, I'm trying to think, you know, a bit like Batman. It's like the Joker. He's a bit of a badass, right? You know, especially if you watch some of the films. You don't want to be Penguin. You're like a penguin. You're not cool. You're not dark. You're mysterious. You're a penguin. And you haven't got any superpowers or anything cool. You're just a penguin with a silly laugh. And I guess that wasn't the best analogy. I just couldn't think of a really rubbish baddie. And I'm sure, again, as usual, you're all shouting at me, oh, what about... So all I can think of is like Batman and Robin. Like, you want to be Batman, not Robin, right? In terms of superheroes, like, you don't want to be Aquaman. Although the actor who plays Aquaman, he's a badass, isn't he? Jason, whatever. He's super cool, huh? But you don't want to be him. You want to be someone cool. Who's a rubbish baddie? I can't think. Anyway, go to Instagram. Go and find the post about this. I tend to do my post on Instagram for this on a Saturday morning, just so you know. Sometimes I release these podcasts on a Thursday, so you might have to wait till the Saturday. But go and tell me who a baddie is that I should have said. Anyway, Malhotra is like the penguin to Mark Hyman, the Joker. Anyway, so if you're going to be a charlatan and make up lies and push dogma and, you know, push people toward disordered eating and food fear, etc., at least do it well. Don't just be the rubbish one. I don't know if I'm sending out a good message there, because really you want to be a baddie. That's what we want, is people who fail at being bad, isn't it? It's a bit like the Ricky Gervais joke, which I'm not actually going to say. I'll move on. Malhotra basically did this tweet going, total Faye, total Greek yogurt, 0%. This is a frankenfood. All of this loaded sugar. This is what's giving people diabetes. Literally, the poster, high protein, 9 or 10% protein, no added ingredients other than the probiotics, the bacteria used in the fermentation process to make the Greek yogurt. It's just literally strained yogurt. No added ingredients, no flavor. It's known for that. And he chose that. Out of all of the Muller Light 0% added sugar, whatevers he could have chosen, he chose that. And you know, he's just a dummy, to be honest. And he's just in it for fame, and he's a low-carb zealot, if you're not aware, him and all of his cronies, and it's really sad. Yeah, and he's on UK TV, and I really wish he would just fail and be cancelled, because he's a doctor and he should know better, and he should have his license stripped. And anyway, I'm ranting now, but I'm just annoyed that all of these people are misleading people. And he's I think he's a cardiologist maybe by trade. Again, zero training in nutrition, but thinks suddenly overnight he can be an expert. Doctors. Why do doctors with no nutrition qualifications release books on nutrition? Why do they do it? It's because of society, isn't it? Doctors used to be upstanding citizens, and now they're just chumps who want to be famous and have social media followers and GMTV slots. Anyway, moving on. Some reduced fat foods do contain a lot of added sugar. For taste, for palatability, food industry does not care about our health. They want to jump through hoops, and while still making us buy their products because they want them to taste good, etc. It's a bit like the Pringles one. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. Moving on. Sugar. Hopefully you've learned some stuff, even some people to never listen to if you see them on TV. How is sugar broken down and stored by the body? And this is a good question, actually, because I did. This is where I'm going to talk just briefly. And actually, I'm going to do a second part to this, talking about sugar addiction, maybe. And as a coach, how to change people's mindset towards sugar was another one of Tom's questions. Why does there seem to be a massive stigma towards sugar? So I'll talk about this stigma. This stigma has come from the fact that added sugar and the sugar industry and the lobbying, this is where there is bad stuff and where zealots gain, and dietetics associations being in bed with the Sugar Bureau, the Sugar Association, these lobbying bodies for sugar to promote the consumption of sugar to make money. And we know it's not something we particularly want to eat a huge amount of. It is relatively and, distinctly nutrient sparse. It just provides us with very, tasty, inexpensive source of calories and something that we don't want to be consuming a huge amount of, which is why we come onto the subject of things like sugar-sweetened beverages. That, again, are really something we want to limit the consumption of. They are not part of what anyone would deem to be an optimal diet. The optimal diet doesn't really exist. We can exist on a very wide range of macronutrients and foodstuffs and food types, but no diet that would ever be deemed to be something that looked like optimal would contain a large amount, and even really a small amount, again, outside of simply someone expending an extreme amount of calories just needing to get energy in and maybe consuming that from sugar because it's the easiest, a very easy source of calories that's not very filling at all. So someone who's struggling to get enough calories, we might want to look at sugar. Yes, in care settings, we might want to have a high amount of sugar to encourage the consumption of calories. But we're not talking about specific clinical situations. In the very elderly, very frail cancer situations, we're not talking about those. So, why has it got this stigma? Well, because it's been aggressively marketed, and because it does taste good. And also there's this idea of, oh my goodness, and in fact, I'm not going to go there. We'll talk about the whole sugar addiction and whatever in part 2. But it's funny, why does it have this massive stigma towards sugar? Well, because rightly so, that we do need to pay attention to the pushing of sugar, the inclusion of sugar in lots of foodstuffs, the fact that it does make food can taste good, the fact that we tend to probably consume more calories. This is this quality versus quantity discussion that I will have in like a part 3 or a separate podcast. So how is sugar broken down and stored in the body? Well, then we start getting this discussion. Again, does the body know? I'll go back to that. This, honey versus whatever, table sugar. It's the difference between, well, if we're talking the body knowing difference between a white powder and, in the form of sugar, of course, and an apple. Well, it's the difference of the fact that an apple contains other stuff. And we still, hopefully people are aware of this. I mean, like sometimes nutrition's simple. Why do you try to overcomplicate it? Well, there are many elements of simplicity within nutrition, but it's also very complex. And some people acting like we know everything. Like, we can talk just about foods and the types of foods you should eat. Yeah, great. It's pretty simple, but there is also a wide variety. There's also some interesting conundrums out there. But there's still a lot for us to learn with regards to bioactive components of food. That we talk about vitamins and minerals like that's it. There's also these other bioactive components. There's also like the matrix of the way foods are, and the fact that we have the same macros and the same fatty acids in foods, but they act very differently depending on the type of food. We're learning more about that. And we're still, got this huge new area of fiber. Used to just be fiber, and we're learning so much more about different fiber types and how they act in the body, and this idea now that soluble and insoluble fiber is far too simplistic of an explanation around fibers even, and how that's affecting our gut and the huge role that the gut may play in our health. But eating an apple or whatever foodstuffs that have these phytonutrients, these bioactive compounds, these things that might be affecting in our health in ways we don't fully understand. But the fact is eating an apple, yes, is healthier than eating the equivalent sugar and water and maybe some apple fiber pectin as maybe separate dietary constituents. So we have stigma because sugar has been loaded into our diet, and maybe we consume too much through various different sources. People, again, I keep going down this like sugar addiction route. I want to try and stay away from there. How is it broken down and stored in the body? That's the other one. So I did this quote post, I call it, on Instagram. No, sugar is not turned to fat as soon as it's absorbed. And it's this, and that was specifically in response to this, again, some of these zealots and charlatans and people who like to demonize food and foodstuffs. And this idea that literally, you consume sugar, you drink a sugar-sweetened beverage, a fizzy drink, a full sugar fizzy drink, and, you only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood, and therefore anything more than 1 teaspoon in any meal and it will instantly turn to fat. And that is categorically incorrect. And I'm not promoting that. I'm just talking science, and you're entitled to your opinions but not facts, and your opinions you should probably just keep to yourself because you're an idiot if you're someone who's saying this, or to people who ask you for your opinion. But when we're talking about facts, it is so difficult for the body to turn sugar into fat. And I think for some of you listening to this, some of my general population followers, you will be amazed to hear that. You can have a lot of sugar, and even if you have that sugar right before bed, you're not turning that into body fat to any great extent. To gain fat from just eating sugar and even carbohydrate, you would have to eat hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grams of carbohydrate a day for days on end to then make some grams of fat from that carbohydrate. Grams. And this is because of a process called de novo lipogenesis, the making of new fat from something that was not fat before, carbohydrate. This is a really what's called ivory tower discussion. It's just a pointless discussion. It's almost, again, children, cover their ears, please. Earmuffs. Children, earmuffs. We'll do that from now on, right? I'm going to have to explain it every podcast. I'll get a new listener complaining. Children, earmuffs. It's mental masturbation. This thing of thinking about something just for the fun of thinking about, just doing it. It's got no real end. It's not coitus, which has a point. But just this, it's just having a discussion about something. It's just ridiculous. Because if you eat in a calorie excess, you're going to gain fat. to one degree or another, depending on your genetics and predisposition. But you're in an excess for an extended period of time, you're going to gain fat. Now, it's just the fact that where that body fat comes from will be your body turning your dietary fat into body fat. Because what happens, and this is kind of this question, is what happens when you eat sugar or carbohydrate is you store and burn more carbohydrate. When we release that hormone insulin, which everyone has heard of and is an expert on apparently, it tells the body it's a fuel selection hormone and a storage hormone. So it says to your body, we have lots of carbohydrate, which then appears in our blood and is broken down into these sugars. And it says to the body, having too much of this sugar in our blood is bad for us. When we aren't able to regulate, in the instance of things like diabetes, you get things like diabetic retinopathy. That's when you see people going blind. You have people getting gangrene on their toes. These things happen when people have consistently elevated blood sugar levels. So the body doesn't want that. And when the body's working, it goes, right, burn that sugar for fuel to get rid of it and bring those levels down, and store it. Push it into your muscles and your liver. Then when you eat fat, whether that's from, avocados or nuts or, your grass-fed salmon or any of these foods, it's still going to be stored as body fat, adipose tissue. And that's where the fat comes from. It's not from those carbohydrates. So it doesn't matter, because a calorie excess is all that matters. But then you get these situations. I remember on Twitter, this is probably going back about 10 years. And yes, I hold a grudge. No, I don't. Just have a good memory. But this guy who had a PhD in biochemistry, and this is when I was big, I say big on Twitter, not big, 10,000 followers, whatever. But when I was big, as in spent too much time on Twitter, like I now spend too much time on Instagram. And this guy, PhD in biochemistry, was like, yeah, if you eat too much sugar, you'll gain fat. And I said, well, yeah, but if you're in a calorie excess. And he said, no, you could eat 500 calories a day. If it all came from sugar, that's too much sugar, you'll gain fat. And I was like, are you kidding me? And we went back and forth, and I explained it to him. And it was really interesting because fair play to him, he admitted that he was wrong, and he kind of had a bit of an awakening. I was like, oh yeah, sheesh. And he had posted some diagram, and he basically went, oh yeah, I'm wrong. Wow, geez. You can't eat 500 calories a day, no matter, maybe if you're weigh 5 kilos, 2 kilos. No adult is eating 500 calories a day and gaining fat just because it's from sugar. That's not how it works. Even if you're eating 1,000, 2,000 calories a day, if you're not in a calorie excess, you're not gaining adipose tissue. You need to be in a calorie excess for that to happen. And even then, it's difficult to do it from carbohydrate. And then that takes people into these stupid discussions. Oh, Martin, if I was to eat 99% carbohydrate and 1% protein and no fat, and then I went into calorie excess, who cares? Stop mentally masturbating. Right, where were we? It doesn't immediately get turned to body fat. That is not a thing. And then finally, I haven't written it down actually, but oh yes, I have. So there's this goon with 1 million followers on Instagram, Morelli, someone or other. And he's got 1 million followers, but he gets like about 32 likes. So I imagine most of them are bought, or the people who follow him don't really like him. They just follow him because he says silly things. And I wish everyone would just unfollow these people. Anyway, loads of people sent me this thing. And he basically said, look, when people are gaining body fat, all of these science guys will jump and go, it's the calories, but it's not. It's the sugar. So again, I did some stuff to re-educate him on that. And it's just not the case. But, and maybe, yes, this will be what's the discussion in the quality versus quantity discussion. is around, sugar calories. But not just sugar calories, but when we're not counting calories, but a lot of our calories or food is high in sugar. And what happens? So I'm going to leave it there. So tune in for part 2 or 3 or whatever, some discussions around quality versus quantity, some more discussion about weight loss whilst consuming sugar. I'll put that in there because I don't know if Tom asked anything about that, but we'll talk about sugar addiction and so weight loss whilst eating sugar, sugar addiction, and then either in that one or another one we'll talk about quality versus quantity and how sugar plays a role within that and body fat regulation, etc. Right, I hope you've enjoyed this. I feel like we did some science today and some ranting and some good stuff and even a teeny tiny bit of humour in there somewhere. Get back to me on the baddie thing, right? Do that. Until next time, much love.